If you look at the cultural norms, if you want to call it that in law, working hard, long hours, being tough, those are the things that people see as important traits. So busyness becomes a kind of proxy for, I'm a really good professional, I go that extra mile, I put the hours in. Not asking for help or saying I've got a problem, that's a badge of I'm on it, I'm self-sufficient. So we use those indicators to validate the way we work, as saying, well, these are the professional skills I need, and because I work like this, that means I'm really good at what I do.
Welcome to Legal Off the Leash, the podcast where we take the legal profession out of the box and into a happier, more fulfilling future.
This is me, Elizabeth de Stadler, and Scott Simmons, and today we are talking to Elizabeth Rimmer. I'm really thrilled to meet Elizabeth. She's the CEO of LawCare. LawCare is a charity that promotes and supports good mental health in the legal community across the UK, and I can say unwittingly maybe also in South Africa. She firmly believes that mental health and well-being is a collective responsibility and that it is something that should be addressed by our whole profession. She finds shared ways to create a sustainable and thriving legal profession that values good mental health and welcomes everybody. We are thrilled to have you here, Elizabeth.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, Elizabeth.
Today, I'm willing to bite the bullet and be Liz, which is something that Scott likes calling me anyway, because he thinks that it frustrates me, which is a little bit true. The second thing is that Scott and I have a kind of sibling thing going where we are constantly teasing each other. So don't be alarmed if you hear a bit of that. But I had a question for you, and that is, when does teasing cross over into bullying? Because I flirt with that line sometimes, I fear.
That's a really difficult question, and if you want a serious answer to that, I think teasing often falls under the kind of banner of banter, and so often banter in the workplace or between friends, things can be said in jest, and people will say, "Oh, it was just a bit of banter. I was just teasing you." But I think it's important to recognise that sometimes things said in banter or teasing can actually affect and have an impact on other people. And I think it's a fine line. I think it's about understanding the people you're around and who you're speaking with. So if you're saying something that might be ribbing them about something personal characteristic of theirs, or a hobby they might enjoy, or they're out in the pub and they're not having a drink and you're saying, "Oh, come on, why aren't you drinking?" There might be a reason you're not drinking. You may not want to drink for cultural reasons, or you might be on antibiotics. You might be pregnant, but you don't want to tell people. So I think that you need to be sensitive, I think, sometimes. But I think it also depends on the relationship. I think it might be different, say, between good friends or siblings or within a relationship. But in the workplace, you got to be careful about banter, and the impact can also be very excluding of other people. So I think you've probably all experienced sort of being in a workplace where people might be talking about a football match or shared activity and other people weren't there, and they go off into a great big banter, long chat about it, ribbing each other, and the other people in the room can't participate in that. So it's a fine line, but it's definitely recognized that banter and teasing can amount to bullying and excluding behavior.
God, maybe we should have a safe word, that you can use if I'm over the line. Anyway, I can see Scott just giving a terrified smile there.
Yeah, you will learn that this is less about me and more about Elizabeth. I adore her and I treat her beautifully, and all I get in return is grief. It's a good thing. It's a good thing that my ego is bulletproof, because otherwise this would end. Anyway, so can I just start by saying thank you so much for coming on. When we were putting together our dream list of guests who we wanted to talk to, particularly bearing in mind that this is a podcast that is talking about having not just a successful career, but a happier career, really dealing with serious topics around mental health. Liz and I have both suffered with burnout. You were at the very top of our list of dream guests that we wanted to speak to, because for everything else that we talk about on this show, this one I think will kind of set the bar for this particular topic. So thank you so much for coming on.
I hope I live up to your expectations. Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm always happy to talk about mental health and why it matters in law and the work that we do at LawCare to address that. So thank you.
So I was very interested to see that you started off in clinical negligence, which was my first career as well. I'm very interested to know how you got from there to where you are today.
So I always was training and qualified as a clinical negligence solicitor at a well-known firm for this area of work called Leash. And Sarah Lee had set up the firm, and she was one of the pioneers in the UK of developing clinical negligence as a practice area of law. So I was beside myself that I was her article clerk and that I then qualified and I was kept on in her team. So I thought I had died and gone to heaven, and I had literally got the best job ever. And I felt so privileged to be working with her, and she is terrific, and I learned so much from that experience. But as I qualified and started taking on more of my own work, I increasingly became worked up, shall we say, that I didn't feel that litigation was really what people were looking for when they came to see a solicitor. People would come in to the office with literally a carrier bag of their medical records or the medical records of a family member that they had managed to obtain. And they really just wanted answers. They wanted to know why their baby was catastrophically brain injured or why their husband had died on the operating table. And what they found, obviously, is in those scenarios, the minute there's a whiff of negligence, the shutters just come down and no one talks to you. And I think most people came in wanting answers, and they wanted an apology. They wanted someone to stand up and say, I'm sorry this happened to you. And what I kind of began to realize that our process at the bottom line, litigation, what we did was about financially compensating people for loss. That's what we were there to do. But of course, the job was much bigger than that, because actually you're providing a huge amount of emotional support to your clients. Also wrestling yourself with some of the things that you read and heard and were exposed to. So I found all of that quite tricky. And I thought, am I actually cut out for this? Am I going to survive, 25 years of this? I found it really quite difficult. So I wasn't sure if it was for me. And so I decided that I would have a year out, and kind of always thinking like a lawyer, and thought, oh well, I'll go and do this master's in medical law and ethics because it will look good on my CV, right? If I want to come back into law. But also I was very interested in that aspect of the work. So I went off and did my MA, and I left Lee Day, and that was a hard moment, and Sarah was very accommodating, but I think she felt that maybe I wasn't making the right choice. But I felt that for me, I was young. I wasn't sure if this was me, and I thought, I'm not following a rigid path if I have to do this. So I went off and did my master's. And then while I was doing that, through pure coincidence, one of my best friend's mum was the chair of a global international Alzheimer's charity called Alzheimer's Disease International, which was like a federation of Alzheimer's societies across the world, including South Africa. We had our conference in Johannesburg in 1999, so I was there a couple of times. And so I got a part-time job working for them because by this time I had a mortgage. My dad had lent me the fees to do my master's, and I needed a job while I was doing this master's. So I took a part-time 2-day-a-week job working as the administrator in this global charity. Back in the day before email, this is the 90s, so my main job was basically sending faxes around the world that would take forever and never go through. I'm sure if you remember faxes, it was just the most stressful job ever, sending faxes. So that's what I basically did. And then, interestingly, but kind of sadly really, the chap that ran that organization, the CEO, he actually collapsed one day at work when I was there from stress. And he literally fainted in front of me, and I couldn't get him up, and that was a great big kind of drama. He never came back, and he basically took time out. I think looking back I didn't realize, but I think he was burnt out. And so then they said to me, oh, would you like to stay and take over? And I was like, oh, by this time I was thinking of going back to law, as it happens. And then I kind of thought about the path not taken, and I had an international upbringing. I'm British, but I was born in London, but I didn't live in the UK till I was nearly 16, and I'd been to lots of international schools. I've been all over the world, and I kind of thought this will be interesting. So it was never by design, it was circumstantial. So that then set me working in the charity sector, and I stayed at ADI for 10 years. And then I had a son when I was nearly 40, and I had a few years off. And then I went back into working for the Institute of Group Analysis part-time, which was a membership organization for group psychoanalysts. And then we were in London then, and then we moved to Bath. That job was in London, and I thought, I can't carry on with this commute. My son is 5 years old. I'm going up to London at 5 o'clock in the morning twice a week. This is nuts. So I need a new job. And so I was just looking for a job, and I saw the job at LawCare advertised in The Guardian. And they were looking for someone who'd been a lawyer, had worked in small mental health charities, and I kind of thought, I think I tick all the boxes here. So I just applied for that. I'd never heard of LawCare, which had been in existence when I was in practice, but I didn't know of it. So I applied for the job, and then I've been here. I think I've been here 10 years now, so I'm coming up to, I think it'll be 11 years in September. So my career path was not linear, and it was not by design. It was all often circumstantial. I'm very much a person who makes decisions around where I'm at now and what's in front of me. What do I think are the right choices for me and what I need to do? So I realised I wasn't going to manage a job in London with a 5-year-old living in Bath. And the attraction to LawCare when I came here is we're a fully remote organisation. We do not have an office, so this was even then there weren't that many fully remote organizations in the kind of 2015, I think, when I came here. And that gave me, for me, with a child in primary school, I felt, well, I've got the flexibility. I can take him to school, I can pick him up at 3. And I was very interested in coming back into the legal sector. And I hadn't articulated my own experiences back when I was training and qualified. And I realized that actually, there's a lot in this space around the impact the work has on us as individuals. And I love it. I love being here. Hence, I'm still here.
You see a lot of press around things like the legal profession has got a mental health crisis. And I know that you do a lot of research and that there's the Life and the Law report, and I believe that you're currently working on a new one. My question has always been, there is a worldwide mental health crisis. Is it the case that lawyers have bigger mental health problems, or that it is more prevalent in the legal profession than in any other profession?
I think that's a really interesting question. And I think certainly there's a growing body of evidence, as you've already mentioned, globally, that there are some challenges around mental health in the legal sector. I think it's harder to make comparisons to other professions or sectors because a lot of that data and research will not have been done on a like-for-like basis. So you will see in some jurisdictions headlines and statistics that will say that lawyers are more stressed and burnt out than others. In the UK, I wouldn't say that we have the evidence to say that if we were going to be scientific about it and compare it. I think what we do know is that there are high levels of stress, anxiety, and significant risk of burnout in the legal sector. I think we will have some data on that coming out in our 2025 study. We've actually done a wellbeing measure, and we used a recognized measure that we'll be able to compare to the UK general population. So we will have that statistic, but I'm not able to share that yet because we haven't finished the data analysis. I think what the point is really, though, is that we know inherently that the ways we work in law and some of those legal thinking styles and the mindset of lawyers is what creates almost the perfect storm for some of the challenges that we see. I'm not so sure. It's of limited value, I think. Oh, well, we're more stressed than doctors, but we're less stressed than vets, or whatever it is. Actually, we don't need to look outwards at this problem. We need to look inwards and fix it and develop a collective sense of, we know we've got problems in our sector. How do we deal with them collectively? Which, you must have taken that off my LinkedIn profile. My commitment to building a collective responsibility across the profession. It's not just me, it's LawCare and I think many others. And I think that's the challenge that we face. And the other thing, the point I think that's really important to make, none of this stuff is new, right? LawCare was set up in 1997. So that's coming up for getting on for almost 30 years ago now. There was no email, there was no internet, there was no hyper-connected world. Law firms weren't as globalized as they are now. I think back to the early 90s when I was qualifying and looking for training contracts. I think big firms like Clifford Chance, if they had an offer overseas, it would be in Brussels. You didn't have such a strong presence of the US law firms in the UK. And globally, I don't think law firms were as big as they are now. So it was a very different environment. But we still had challenges. If you wanted to work late, you either had to stay in the office or you had to carry a lot of paper home with you in a briefcase, right? But the LawCare was set up in 97, but we'd actually had a few years of being created, was because the Law Society of England and Wales, who look after solicitors here, were concerned about how much lawyers were drinking and using alcohol as an unhealthy coping mechanism. So we had our roots as being an alcohol service. And our first CEO was a solicitor who was in recovery from alcohol. He had retired, and we ran a service for people that were worried about their use of alcohol, and they could contact us for support. Obviously, we've fast forwarded now, and we are much broader than just alcohol. And I think alcohol is a sign of troubles, and it's one of the things people turn to cope. But the data is very clear that, particularly from our Life in the Law study that we did in 2021, which was the first of its kind in the UK, and we really wanted to understand what is it about working practices in law that were undermining people's mental health. And the big news that came out of that is we measured burnout, and we found in our study size, which was just over 1,700 people responded to that they were already above the cutoff point for being at significant risk of burnout. The World Health Organization, for example, have done a lot of work around what healthy workplaces look like and what are the factors that contribute to poor mental health associated with work. They brought some guidance out a couple of years ago. And when you look at that, you see all of the factors present: working long hours, lack of flexibility, a lack of good management, bullying and harassment, working in environments where you don't feel valued or listened to. There's a whole list of them. Law ticks all of those, but as do many sectors. We're not unique in that. So I think there's a lot of environmental stuff. And then I think touching on the mindset part is that generally lawyers tend to have a perfectionist personality, so there's no room for error. They tend to often see that they need to be self-sufficient. We're here to solve other people's problems, so we don't have any of our own. So can find it very difficult to delegate or ask other people for help. There's a real fear of making mistakes. So there's often a sense that there's no room for error. So if you do make a mistake or something goes wrong, often your reaction to that is fear, or other people might blame you for what's gone wrong rather than trying to understand or learn from that situation. And there's also a very common lawyer trait of rumination. I think everyone identifies with that. You know, you come off a call with a client or you step out of court where you didn't think it went the way you wanted it to, and you will replay it in your head, a bit like a washing machine. Everything you said, what the other person said, and you're always looking for where you went wrong. So that kind of mindset, coupled with a very tough environment, working environment, high expectations of you from colleagues, clients, regulators, that's an increasing issue here in the UK, as I'm sure it is in other jurisdictions. All of that kind of creates an environment that leads to the problems that are well known. But the challenge is, actually, there's a lot we can do about all of that. We've become really good at admiring the problem, I think, in law. We love to quote the statistics. We know all of this. The challenge now is, we know that. How do we fix it? I think that's where the next decade has to go, is how do we fix this? How do we improve working practices? How do we better prepare people coming into this sector for a healthy and thriving career? And that's the challenge.
It is incredible listening to you, the knowledge and the way that you articulate what the issues are. I've almost reached a point where I'm struggling with what the next question is, because there are potentially so many. But one of the interesting things that you said was, we know what the problems are. I suppose my question is, do we really? Because we all still see posts on social media talking about the fact that if you want to be a lawyer and be a successful lawyer, late nights, early mornings, that sort of badge of busyness, that badge of hard work, it is still a badge
of reaching your target, I think.
Of all of these things. And God, are you getting me started on the billable hour, Liz? Because I will happily go down that road with you. But
please don't.
But it feels as though, yes, we do know that these are problems. But on the other hand, people still say that to be a successful lawyer, you have to do those things that we are currently talking about as being really bad for us.
Well, I think that's so. But where's the driver coming for that? So it's coming from the organization that you work in. So if you work in a traditional private practice environment, which a lot of lawyers do, then the metrics for measuring success are meeting your billing target and exceeding it. So what we do in law is we actually say to people, we're going to reward you for working even longer hours and being more available, because it's those people that go above and beyond the target are the ones that get the promotion and the bonus. So we signal to people, you're going to get rewarded for working like this. You're not going to get rewarded necessarily for how well you manage people in your team or the work you may do around diversity and inclusion. Or you might be the one person in the team that just meets the billing target, but you might be the anchor person in that room that everyone else likes coming into work or working there because of you. You're the person that's always listening or is that constant. So I think it's about how we measure success drives those behaviors. The challenge lies in getting senior leaders in organizations to recognize that this stuff matters. And I think the challenge we have is that at the moment, people working long hours and being effectively overachievers benefits the bottom line of organizations. So where's the incentive? If you're a partner sitting in a law firm, you think, well, I had to do all of that to get here. I'm now enjoying the benefits of this kind of structure. Where's my incentive? Really, there's still plenty of people banging on the door waiting to come in here if this person leaves. So I think the challenge is that I think they know it. It's about how you change the behavior around this. And I think that's the hard part. And that's what we're wrestling with LawCare. And that's what we're hoping our 2025 study, when it comes out in October, we want to make a very strong case for here's the evidence and this is why you need to start changing some of these working practices, because I think we're living in an era of massive change in the way legal services are being delivered, the rise of AI and tech against a very uncertain geopolitical climate. There's a lot more anxiety and uncertainty in the world. There's also growing scrutiny and expectations from clients. So now in an era of social media, it's so easy for your reputation to be easily damaged, or things that may have gone on in your firm can be in the more of the public domain, and other organizations and potential clients can see all of that. Likewise, people that might be coming to work for your organization. So Gen Z's coming into the workplace are very social media savvy. They're looking for organizations that align with their values, their ways of working. So I think that the challenge is about trying to make the case for a sustainable sector, but also, although I don't think everybody is completely sold on it, there is a lot of evidence that shows people with good mental health are more productive, they're more engaged, they're more likely to stay in your organization, they're less likely to make a mistake, all of those things. But I think while people are still kind of treated as a commodity rather than an asset, really, that you just see the bulk numbers and you think, okay, well, if 5 people leave, I don't know whether that's just built into the business model. The attrition may be just built in as something, well, we just have to suck that up. So I think that's where we got to try and make the switch. And you're beginning to see on the fringes of law, there's more disruption in the models about way people work. There's more freelance solicitors. There are these new model law firms where people are all consultants and they can kind of do their own work. You're seeing a big rise in the number of people. I think almost a third of the profession now work in-house, not necessarily driven by just working practices in private practice, but that's a growing area as well. So that's the challenge, I think, is how we persuade the powers that be, if you want to call it that actually we need to re-examine what success looks like in law. What about client outcomes? Would they recommend us to a colleague or another organization or business? Have we got through this big transaction with everybody still okay? They haven't had to sacrifice their cousin's wedding or the birth of their child. So I think that's where the conversation needs to go. And I think it's hard because I think that I'm not sure that everybody in those positions is actually bought into this. And yet you then have the dichotomy of firms saying, look at all the great well-being initiatives we're doing. Yet then on the other side, they're actually saying, well, if you exceed your target, we're going to give you more money. So there's a disconnect there, and we need to even that out.
I call that well-being theater. It's almost like how firms work with innovation, like it's skin deep, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that I do think increasingly people are beginning to get it, and I think you have pockets of people that do get it. But we've got to really help senior people, the decision makers in this space, recognize that actually people can work smarter, not harder. And I hear anecdotally, I don't know if it's true, that productivity's actually gone down. So when people might be putting down 8 billable hours that they've done, they may only be able to ultimately charge 4 of them, whereas in the past they might have been able to do 6 or 7. I've had a couple of people tell me that that's a concern in some firms, that actually the rate of recovery has gone down, but people are putting in more hours. So that then begs the question, well, why is that happening? And you've already mentioned the billable hour. I think that's obviously one of those big hot topics that's constantly been discussed since Kingdom Come. But I think the interesting thing about the billable hour is that what it does is it's just valuing people's time rather than their knowledge and their expertise and what they're delivering and the wider piece of what they may be bringing into an organization. I think it's about maturity, really, and I think organizations mature and there's much more awareness about this stuff in the business world and across society as a whole that hopefully we'll start to see that infiltrate.
So I think what's so interesting about this whole conversation, and you mentioned AI, and then you said what we do is we value people's time. So the longer something takes you, the more you're going to be paid. Yeah. And what AI is increasingly showing is that things can be done really quickly with the same outcome and the same quality of output as well. And that will just increase. And so not just this conversation, but this concept that we have in our mind of our values in our time actually has never really been real. We just haven't had the technology until now to be able to show that our value was never in our time. It was in our outcomes. It was in our knowledge and our experience and that sort of thing that we bring to the table. I think what's very interesting is that at the top of businesses, you have baby boomers versus this new generation, this Gen Z who are coming through, who don't believe that those working practices correlate to great outcomes. And as a generation brought up on technology, they can see that it's about the speed of the outcome is better for clients. And clients don't want to be told, oh, we've had to work really hard at this. Clients want to be told, here's this really great outcome for you. And clients will pay for that really great outcome. But you have this kind of generation war going on between the people at the very top who are 2, 3, even more generations away from the new lawyer coming through, and neither of them understand each other. But the point is that the new generation are the future of the business, and so overcoming that in itself is a problem.
Well, interesting you've just about the generational divide, if you want to call it that, because that's been another big hot topic. We actually ran a webinar called Let's Talk About Gen Z, and interestingly, plug for LawCare here for your UK listeners, we launched a reverse mentoring toolkit that we did with a project with the University of Leeds. We ran some pilot groups between senior and junior lawyers, really around well-being and inclusion. So the junior person was being the mentor and the senior person was the mentee. And so we've now got a toolkit for that. And that's about trying to bridge that gap. Actually, what was really interesting at the event, and you can get it from our website, it's free, downloadable, is that one of the mentees, who was a partner in a large law firm who was on the panel, and he said it was so illuminating for him listening and being mentored by a junior member of staff, because he really didn't have any idea about their experiences and expectations. And you may have children of that generation, but it's a different dynamic. You're not in the workplace with them. I have a son who's Gen Z, and he's always telling me, Mum, you can't say that. And I think I'm quite switched on. We're at dichotomy on some of those things, but I'm not working with him. It's a different dynamic, but I think it's really interesting. And I think what we have to see is, I think this has always been a historical problem. I think there's a lot of discussion now. I think there's always been generational differences. challenge also now is we live in an era where we have more generations in the workplace than probably ever before. You've still got people working in their 60s, so that's been quite interesting. So that's a shift. Also, I think we just need to see Gen Z as messengers of how things are changing and the expectations that they have. Because as you say, they are the future. The other thing about them, and it's something we've asked in our study, which will be interesting to see what that data tells us. We've asked people for this life in the law about their career aspirations. How long are you planning to stay in this organization? Are you thinking of leaving? That will be out obviously in October, but I know from generally that Gen Z, younger people, less likely to stay in a job. They stay 3 to 5 years, 3 being average. So that pathway of traditional private practice, come in and as a trainee young lawyer and work your way to a partner, that's going. They don't want to be partners, and they don't see that as their future, or they're moving on. So that, I think, that may be a incentive to rethink some of things, because from a sustainability point of view, who's going to carry on the business if they've all left? I think we need to listen to what Gen Zs are telling us, and their experiences are very different, and they are the future. And I think, your point about AI and tech, I think the one thing I want to say about that additionally is I think what that does, it gives us a real opportunity to value the human skills that lawyers bring to the workplace. AI and tech are tools. They're just tools to help us do our job. I don't see them as replacing lawyers. They are just something that's going to help you. I use AI a lot. We do it to summarize meetings. Sometimes if I'm doing a panel, I say I've got to ask, what's the best question I could ask a managing partner of a law firm about mental health in their firm? Sometimes I put that in chat. Sometimes it's a load of nonsense, but it sometimes helps you to get thinking about where you want to go. So it's just a tool. But I think if we were able to work smarter and use these tools better, then we could be thinking about the human skills that we have. I don't like the word soft skills because I don't think they're soft. I think they're hard. What clients are looking for is trust, judgment, empathy, your experience, your knowledge, your ability to communicate. And I think in an era where we're so tech enabling, like we're communicating, we've never met in the real world, we may never meet in the real world. But that's also a challenge, I think, particularly for Gen Zs. It's building their confidence around how they communicate with people, because they are not as adept, shall we say, and have some fear about using the phone and face-to-face meetings. And I still think that's a very important part of the workplace. So I think what we could be doing is valuing more our human skills and doing more investment, and people would have more time to do all of that. And surely we should be celebrating the fact that we've got some tools that might mean, well, I don't have to do 9 hours today, I can do 6. The challenge will come that I think clients ain't going to pay for work that could be done by AI. They're looking for efficiency. And I think the danger then becomes, we don't want law firms saying, okay, well, you're using those tools, so that still means you can just do even more. And, at LawCare, we run a support service, we run a telephone helpline, email, web chat. Monday to Friday, we hear from people every single day about their experiences of working in law. And what we hear consistently is people feel they're being squeezed to do more with less all the time. And I don't think that's just symptomatic in law. I think that's across society. You mentioned busyness at the beginning. I'm in that category myself. I have an attic that needs clearing out because we cannot get any more stuff in it, because I just shove stuff up there because I think, I haven't got time to go to the tip. I haven't got time. We're constantly chasing our tails. And I think we've got to reset that, because it's not a healthy way to be.
I always found it really puzzling that when you ask a lawyer how they are, they will always respond, busy, thank you. And I think it's that cult of busyness.
I think there's always an anxiety about not having any work.
Yeah. So
I think it's also a bit of I can't think what word it is, so I'm going to say a prestige thing, isn't it? Is that no one wants to say I'm not busy, because that implies that you're not as good.
You're not good,
or
yeah.
there isn't out there. So everyone wants to say they're really busy, even when perhaps
And I think
not.
if you look at the cultural norms, if you want to call it that in law, working hard, long hours, being tough, those are the things that people see as important traits. So busyness becomes a kind of proxy for, I'm a really good professional, I go that extra mile, I put the hours in. Not asking for help or saying I've got a problem, that's a badge of I'm on it, I'm self-sufficient. So we use those indicators to validate the way we work, is saying, well, these are the professional skills I need, and because I work like this, that means I'm really good at what I do. And we sink into using those as the wrong measures, really, but because that's the environment that we're in, isn't it? That's what everyone, as you say, busy is what we all want to say we are, because we think that equals great lawyer.
And if that's the case, then, Elizabeth, how do we get people to realize that actually talking about mental health, talking about their own struggles, how do we turn people around from this thinking in this world where all of these things, the busyness and long hours, are considered these badges of, how do we get people to open up about these struggles so that they don't go over that edge and they don't feel lost?
Well, I think it's a number of things. I think in the workplace, you need to be in an environment where you feel if you are going to open up, someone's going to listen and they're going to do something about it. We know from our first study, some of the qualitative data, people said, I didn't think there was any point speaking up because I knew no one was going to do anything about it. So why would I bother? So I think from a workplace perspective, you've got to create an environment where people feel if they do come forward, someone's going to listen and take action. But also I think it's really important that you see those behaviors in others. So you need to be having those open conversations. So I think some of the best events I've ever been to at LawCare, where I've participated in them that are not in the public domain, are small events in law firms where they've had a panel discussion, they've had me in to talk about LawCare, and they've had people from the firm, not just partners, but across the firm, sharing their own personal stories, and you can nearly hear a pin drop. Because what that does, it then signals this is a safe space to speak about these things. So creating that kind of psychological safety is really important. And I think that comes from a commitment from the top. And also you have to train and support people. I think a fundamental challenge we have in law is that most people that manage other people in law have had no training in how to manage people. And they're not rewarded for it, if you see what I mean. It doesn't form part of their KPIs. And they're not given the time to do it. They will still have a billing target, but they're expected to manage a team. So surprise, surprise, when you're supposed to have a catch up, I'm supposed to have a catch up with you, Scott, and then there's a competing obligation in from the client. I cancel our meeting because I have to deal with this urgent that then says to you, well, I don't matter as much as the clients. So I think in order to get people to come forward, you've got to create the environment for them to feel able to do so. And also we need to respect that not everybody wants to speak to colleagues about things, but it's important, I think, to ensure that people feel able to speak up to somebody, and I think that's a service, good thing that we're here to provide that support. And what I will say is what people always say when they contact LawCare or they speak to someone is just how much better they feel. Even if the problem doesn't get fixed, it's being validated. You're not the only person. That's what we hear all the time at LawCare, because everyone looks around and sees everybody busy, gliding across the pond. They don't see what's really going on for people underneath. To kind of find out that you're not the only person that's ever felt that way is really reassuring. I think it's really about creating those environments and having more people speak up. And we are seeing a lot more of that. I think there are a lot more people in senior roles sharing their own experiences and being open.
That's fantastic. I'm seeing in my own work a lot of senior people asking really good questions. So one of the things that I often get asked at the end of my training is to say, well, what are the signs of burnout? How do I recognize the signs of burnout in an employee that isn't necessarily asking for help?
So I think that's really important, that managers should be trained in recognizing some of the signs of poor mental health. And actually, you want to be picking those sign-ups way before someone's actually approaching burnout. Because, burnout is a recognized phenomena that I think has become a word that lots of people say. There's a diagnostic criteria around it as well, and people that are burnt out are not able to work. They need time out to recover. So I think what you want to be doing is you want to be picking those signs up way before this becomes an issue where people have either reached burnout and need time out, or they're very stressed and they need time out, or they've developed anxiety or depression. So I think that's really important, that managers not only are supported to learn to develop their skills in managing people, they're supported to have the conversations around mental health. We've got some simple guidance, and it's not rocket science to detect that someone might be struggling. Someone who may have always been very on top of things suddenly isn't. Mood swings, switching off cameras, missing meetings, missing deadlines. If you're in the office and you see people physically, is there a change in their appearance, their demeanor, their behavior? Are they more emotional? In yourself, and a sign, and it's the most common one, is problems with sleeping. That's a common trait, people waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, rumination, that the washing machine is going and you can't switch it off and you can't get back to sleep. If we were to say there's a new drug coming out that anyone can have that has no side effects and we can all get 7 hours a day of it, it's sleep, right? And I think we undervalue the importance of sleep for enabling our performance and our supporting our mental health. So yeah, I think it's about education, picking up those signs, and then when noticing that something might not be right, because that's realistically in the real world or hybrid world, we spend more time of our waking time with the people we work with, for people who are in work, than we do with our families or our friends, right, or our partners. And I think you often inherently know that something's not quite right with someone, but we're sometimes too scared to have the conversation because we think, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, what if I say the wrong thing? And I think it's about helping people realize you don't have to fix the problem. You just need to listen and be able to say, I'm really glad you told me that. Let's work out how I can help you get the support you need, because it may not be me. It may be, did you know the firm has this? Or have you thought about going to your GP? It's about trying to signpost people. It's not like I need to fix what's wrong. And those conversations can be so transformative, but we tend to shy. There's also worry about boundaries. Is this something I should be asking somebody? So that's why I think the training on how to have those conversations is so important, because it gives people the confidence to be able to ask those questions.
You mentioned earlier on remote working. Obviously, COVID meant everyone had to work from home. And actually, an ongoing study found that productivity is up like 4% amongst people who work remotely. And a reasonable part of that is because the boundary gets blurred between work and leisure work and that home life that you have. You're no longer doing the commute. So you might not have to leave an hour earlier than the start time, but you might start half an hour before you might normally. You might not have the hour commute at the end, but you can now do a bit of extra. You might be able to do the laundry or go shopping, but now you'll work in the evening after you've put the kids to bed or something. So all of those things are being blurred. And also because now you're working remotely, the weekends don't mean the same that they used to. So you might work at the weekend. But now we're seeing this kind of push for people to come back into the office. And it's a push that a lot of people aren't happy about. Conversely, there's this feeling of, well, like, actually, we're human beings. We're social beings. So actually being around other people is quite important. What's your take on the value of remote working and the impact that it has on mental health?
Well, another big question. Well, I think you have to look at these things in the round. And I think people want flexibility in the workplace. And I think that the horse is bolted now post-COVID, right? And it's not just women with children, it's everybody. Look at my own husband, who has changed the way he works so that basically he can have Fridays to go off and do the things he likes, like cycling and stuff like that, because he kind of thinks, I want to work that way. So, and I think we also need to be less rigid around, I think boundaries are really important, but I think we need to recognize now, with the benefits of the hyper-connected world that we live in, that for some people, they may actually want to work on a Sunday afternoon because that's when the kids are at football club or whatever it is, right? So I think we've got to move away from it's anything after 5 p.m. working is bad. I think it needs to be seen in the round. And so it may be that for you, that Thursday night is when because Friday you've got sports day or you want to take your mother to the hospital or whatever it is, right? So I think we need to have that flexible approach. LawCare is fully remote and we are not in the real world, but I think if you asked anyone in our team, I think we would all feel we're very connected and we have a good working relationship. And I think that's probably because we have a very strong sense of shared values at LawCare. We know why we're here. A lot of our staff are people that worked in law. They've chosen to come and work in this environment, and we all feel very passionate and driven about what we do. So I think that helps us. Also, though, we don't have any particularly young people working in LawCare. I think there's no one under the age of 40, or 40 might be the youngest, right? So we haven't got people in the early stages of their careers in our organization. And I do think that is a question that needs addressing, because I do think it's important that particularly younger people coming into the workplace understand the dynamics of how groups interact in a workplace and how you build relationships with colleagues. And I do think a lot of that does happen in the face-to-face scenario. If you only meet people online, if you want to build trust with them, or you have to create opportunities for people to meet face-to-face. I think the mandating is a problem, and I think the other challenge is that what we hear and I hear, no one wants to come into the office and spend all day on Teams. Because I think, well, I could be doing that at home. What's the point of coming in? So you've got to kind of give people a reason. And I think some of these mandates are maybe driven by fear rather than real evidence. They think, oh, well, if I can't see you, then that means you're not working. And it may be that they've got these great big buildings and rent they're paying for, and there's no one sitting there, and they think, yikes, we need to get people in. Some organizations now are actually monitoring when you swipe in and swipe out. And you think, okay, so what does that tell you? It just tells you somebody was in a building. It doesn't tell you the quality of their work, their interactions with others. So I think we've got to work out in a much smarter way. I don't think I have the answers. Is getting that balance of recognizing the flexibility that people want, the benefits we have now of being able to work remotely. And it's about trust, I think, ultimately. If you trust people and they feel engaged and want to do good work, then they're not going to be skiving off. I never randomly phone anyone at LawCare, or occasionally if there's something urgent. I'm not checking up on people. I don't monitor when people are on their screen. I don't do any of that. I wouldn't even know how to, because I don't have to, because I know everyone's doing their stuff, right? So I think it's about creating that culture where people feel they belong, and then working out ways of bringing opportunities to meet in the real world. Because I certainly think in my own career, I've made lots of good friends at work who are still friends from previous jobs that I still see. And that was built very much in the world when we were going out socially and doing things together. So it's finding that balance, isn't it? But I think we've got to be smarter and less rigid about the rules. We've got to look at flexible and output. What are people delivering? That's really what matters. It's not how long you spend at your desk. It's what you deliver. But we don't really measure that very well in law. We measure how long you spent at your desk, be that in the office or at home.
There's this fantastic book called Lost Connection by Johan Hari. And his thesis basically is that depression is caused by these 9 different types of lost connections. And the one is a lost connection to valuable work, or work that aligns with your values. And what is interesting is he cites a study, and I can never remember by who. When we launch this episode, by then I will find out and we'll make it available. But he found that one of the greatest predictors for being connected to your work and being fulfilled is the level at which you have control over how you work, which I think is exactly what you were just talking about.
Yeah, I think we looked at that in our first study of life in the law, autonomy and control. And there's lots of evidence that shows if you feel you have autonomy over your work and you have more choice, you are happier and more fulfilled and do better on some of the measures of well-being. And I think traditionally law has been quite command and control in its approach to management. And I think that's beginning to change. There are lots of good things about this era of disruption that we're in. I think COVID has catapulted that. This decade of the 20s is the era of disruption, and not just in law, but in all workplaces. And I think we've got to cherry pick the best bits of all of this and try and create something. But I agree, and I think that's part of why maybe that's at LawCare, is that people find the work fulfilling and valuable and feel recognized for what they do, and we see the difference that we make. So that's very rewarding. We're not paid anything like what we would be paid if we were lawyers, but it's not just about the money, is it?
No.
I think that's really interesting, and I think I personally think that all lawyers, particularly senior lawyers, if they had a course in Psychology 101 where they kind of understood what made people tick and what helps people, it would really help to then think you could be designing work better to meet some of those. There's always going to be boring and drudgery stuff that everyone has to do, but it's that 20 or 25% of what you do that really gets you going and makes you get up in the morning is where you really want to make sure people are getting enough of that to make them feel that they're contributing in some way, no matter what their job is. They're recognized for what they do. I couldn't quote any studies, but that often just saying thank you to people and acknowledging what they've done matters more than the big bonus. People want to be seen. And I think that's sometimes a challenge in law. People are not seen for what they do. And you'll get other people that are very good at making sure they are seen and will take the credit or front up. And it may have been a team effort and other people aren't seen, So yeah, I think it's really interesting. But I think it's also a personal choice, isn't it? People need to work out what works for them in terms of having a happy and fulfilling life. And sometimes people sacrifice other aspects of their life for the career path that they've chosen. But that's their choice, isn't it?
Right. With that, I think we're going to launch into the 4 questions. Right. So the first one is, what advice would you give a lawyer just starting out in the profession?
Follow the area of law that you're most interested in. What was it that inspired and made you want to be a lawyer? And try and find that pathway of practice area. Do not fall into the successful lawyer looks like somebody that works at a big city law firm because that's what everyone else is doing. If that's not what you want, follow your own path and find fulfilling work.
Yeah, great response. What's the one thing about the legal profession you wish would change, and how do you think that change could happen?
I think the one thing I would like to see is mandatory training for managers. So if you manage other people, that you are mandated, it's not going to be a regulatory thing, but that all firms recognize the value of management training. And I think what will change that is getting senior leaders in the sector to recognize the value of that, and that investing in those managers will make a better difference to their bottom line and the sustainability of their business.
What is a common myth about success in the legal profession that you would like to change?
We've talked about that quite a lot already.
Yeah.
Working long hours and exceeding your billing target means you're a great lawyer. I think that's a myth. And we have a hidden agenda taught in law that that's what success looks like. Actually, I think what success really looks like is delivering for clients and them coming back and you really enjoying what you've done and felt some reward from that in terms of how you helped them navigate, be that a merger and acquisition of some great big business or someone who's come to you because their children are going to be taken away from them, is finding that you have helped that person or that organization.
That's a great answer. It's a beautiful answer, really profound answer as well. For you, what would it look like if you could design the ideal legal career path?
So I thought about this question. I don't think there is an ideal career path. I think people have to follow their own path and they have to work out what matters to them. And I think the ideal career path is working in an environment where you feel your work is meeting your expectations, you like the people you work with, you feel happy, you want to get up every day and do your job. There may be days where you don't, but most of the time, and you think, actually, this is a great place to work. And I think your expectations change through your career. I think also not being rigid. I think a career path that is flexible and moves where you are in your life and what your needs are, is not always thinking, I have to do this and this is what I have to do for 25 years, because I think that often leads to the sorts of issues that come our way at LawCare. So I don't think there is an ideal career path. I think it's an individual's career path.
Right, to close us off, I would just like to say thank you so much for being on our little show. You've certainly helped me quite a bit to crystallize some of the thoughts that I've had rattling around in my brain for quite a long time. But I think more importantly, this is valuable information for everybody in our industry to have. And if we can do our small part to get that message out, it's an absolute privilege. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation. It's been great.
And before we do go, Elizabeth, how can people contact you? How can they find out more about LawCare?
So the easiest way to find out about us is our website, lawcare.org.uk. So we have a whole section information there about the support service we run and how you can access that. But we also have loads of resources, both for individuals who might be struggling with your sleep or worried that you might be developing burnout. We've got resources for you there. But we also have lots of resources for organizations and managers and leaders on how to create healthier working environments. So our website is your port of call to find out more about LawCare.
A big thank you to Elizabeth Rimmer for coming on the show and sharing her story and telling us so much about LawCare and the work you do. We've been your hosts, Scott Simmons and Elizabeth de Stadler, and this has been Legal Off the Leash.